Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the smell of something ancient, dry desert wind, warm spice, and the faint sweetness of silk moving through open air. Tonight, we are going somewhere very far away and very long ago. We are going to walk the roads that connected the whole world. There is a place in the heart of China, sometime around 2,000 years ago, where the morning comes slowly. The sun rises pale and golden over tiled rooftops, and the city begins to stir. Street vendors arrange their goods. Donkeys shift their weight in narrow alleyways. And somewhere near the edge of the city, a caravan is preparing to move. The camels stand tall and patient, loaded with bundles wrapped in cloth. And inside those bundles, folded carefully, is silk. Cool to the touch, impossibly light, shimmering like water even in the early dark. These caravans did not travel to some single clear destination. There was no single road, not really. What lay ahead was something far more beautiful and far more mysterious, a living, breathing web of paths and passes, deserts and river valleys, mountain crossings and oasis towns, a web that stretched from the eastern edge of China all the way to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, branching and bending and splitting like the tributaries of a great slow river. Historians would one day call it the Silk Road, but the people who actually walked it, who loaded the camels and bargained in the markets and slept beneath foreign stars, they had no such name for it. To them, it was simply the way forward. Let us follow that way forward together. The story begins not with silk, actually, but with something older, jade. Long before the caravans of silk moved westward, the southern paths out of what is now Xinjiang were being walked by jade traders, smooth, pale green stone, cool and heavy in the hand, precious beyond almost all other things. Those paths were ancient when the silk trade was still young. Some scholars say they were in use as far back as 5,000 years before the Common Era. The jade moved slowly, hand to hand, village to village, through mountain passes where the air thinned and the wind came sharp and cold off the high peaks. But then came silk. Silk changed everything. The Chinese had been making silk for thousands of years, and they guarded the secret of its production the way we might guard something irreplaceable, carefully, quietly, with great intention. The silkworms, the mulberry leaves, the spinning of the thread, all of it was kept close, and the fabric that emerged from this careful labor was unlike anything the Western world had ever touched. When Roman merchants first encountered Chinese silk somewhere along the trading chains of the ancient world, they were astonished. The poet Virgil described it as wool combed from the leaves of trees. They had no idea what it actually was, but they wanted it desperately. By the 1st century of the Common Era, silk was so sought after in Rome, in Egypt, in Greece, that Roman senators reportedly passed laws trying to ban men from wearing it, not because it was foreign, but because it was so beautiful and so expensive that too much Roman gold was flowing east to pay for it. Now let us travel those paths ourselves. We begin in the ancient Chinese capital, known today as Xi'an, or in the old records simply as Chang'an, which means in Chinese, eternal peace. It is a city of wide streets and high walls, of markets so busy and so loud that you must lean close to be heard. Merchants here sell not just silk, but tea, wrapped in compressed bricks, and delicate porcelain so fine the light passes through it like a whisper. There is the smell of incense from a nearby temple, and the sound of a guqin being played somewhere in a courtyard behind a wall. The music drifts out into the street, and then is swallowed by the noise of the market. From Chang'an, the first great challenge is the desert, the Taklamakan Desert. The name, in the Uyghur language, carries a meaning something like, you go in, and you do not come out. It sits like a vast silence in the center of Central Asia, surrounded by mountain ranges that catch the clouds and leave the desert floor dry for centuries at a time. The sand shifts constantly. The heat in summer is ferocious, and the cold in winter is absolute. there is almost nothing to drink. And so the ancient routes split. North of the desert and south of it, two great arms of the road curling around that terrible empty centre, following the line of oasis towns that appear in the desert like small miracles. Dunhuang, Kashgar, Khotan. Each of these towns is an island of water and life and trade in the surrounding sea of stone and sand. The travellers who passed through them were grateful beyond words. They stopped, they rested, they traded. They told stories in the evenings while the fire burned low and the desert wind moved over the dunes outside. Kashgar, near the western edge of the Taklamakan, was one of the great crossroads of the ancient world. Sitting at the meeting point of the northern and southern routes, it was a city where a traveller might find himself standing in a market beside someone from China, someone from India, someone from Persia, someone from Rome, languages mixing, faces unfamiliar, and yet some common language of trade, the universal grammar of offering and accepting, of weight and measure, of a hand extended in good faith. From Kashgar, the road pushed on westward through the high passes of the Pamir Mountains. These mountains are some of the most formidable in the world. The air at the higher passes is thin enough to make your head swim, and the paths are narrow, the drops severe. In winter they were impassable. Even in summer they demanded everything a traveller had. The caravans moved slowly here, the camels picking their careful way along the rock. There was silence except for the wind and the clinking of the loads and the occasional sound of a stone falling away into the void below. But they crossed, thousands of them, over the centuries, crossed those mountains and came down into the green valleys on the other side. Here is something worth sitting with, gently, as you begin to let your body rest. Almost no one travelled the entire length of the Silk Road. That image, the lone merchant setting out from China and arriving months later in Rome, is mostly a romantic invention. The reality was something different and in its own way more beautiful. The trade moved like a relay. A merchant from Xi'an might carry his silk as far as Dunhuang and sell it there to someone else. That merchant might carry it as far as Kashgar and sell it on again. Then through the Pamirs, then into the cities of Persia, then through the Parthian Empire to the traders of the Mediterranean. Hand to hand to hand, the silk travelled, and with it the stories, the ideas, the seeds of everything that grew from this great connected web. Let us rest for a moment in one of those oasis towns. Imagine we have arrived at the end of a long day's walking. The camel is unloaded and taken to water. Somewhere nearby there is a fire and the smell of flat bread cooking on a hot stone. Someone is brewing tea. The stars here, away from any city, are extraordinary, thick and close, so many of them that the sky seems almost white in places, the darkness filling in between. You lie back and look up at them, and you think about how far you have come, and how far there still is to go, and somehow the thought is not frightening. The road ahead is simply the road ahead. It will be there in the morning. It was not only silk that travelled this road. Let us think about what else moved through this great living network, because the goods alone are enough to fill the imagination. From the east came tea, compressed into bricks for the long journey, brewed in the evenings in caravanserais all across Central Asia. There was porcelain, so delicate it seemed impossible that it survived the journey. There were dyes, brilliant reds and deep blues, including the extraordinary lapis lazuli, a stone of such intense blue it looked like a piece of fallen sky, ground to powder and used to paint some of the most beautiful art the ancient world ever produced. There were spices and perfumes that filled the trading posts with their scent. From the west came other things, horses, the famous Fergana horses that the Chinese called blood-sweating heavenly horses, bred in the green valleys beyond the Pamirs, larger and more powerful than anything in the Chinese stables, camels and glass and wool, wine, gold, honey. The ancient world was, in many ways, as interconnected as we sometimes imagine only our modern world to be. And then, the things that cannot be weighed or priced. Ideas travelled this road, religions. Buddhism had its beginnings in India, and yet by the first centuries of the Common Era, it had followed the trade routes north and east into Central Asia, and then into China, and then throughout East Asia. The great cave complexes at Dunhuang, carved into the cliffs of the desert, filled with paintings and sculptures accumulated over 1,000 years of devotion, stand today as one of the most extraordinary records of this journey. Monks travelled the same paths as merchants. Some of those merchants built monasteries along the way, partly as acts of faith, partly because a monastery offered shelter and safety to travellers, and safe travellers meant trade kept moving. Zoroastrianism spread along these roads. So did Manichaeism and Islam and Judaism and Nestorian Christianity, which made it all the way to China by the 7th century. There are stone tablets in Xi'an carved in both Chinese and Syriac, commemorating the arrival of this distant branch of Christianity. The world was already, in those centuries, a deeply interconnected place. And there was art. Greek sculptors had followed the armies of Alexander the Great into Central Asia and India in the 4th century BCE, and the style they brought with them mixed with local traditions to create something new, Greco-Buddhist art, images of the Buddha that carry the unmistakable influence of classical Greek sculpture, the curved draping of the robes, the serene, idealized face, a tradition born in the Mediterranean, carried east on the same roads that carried silk west and transformed into something that has no exact precedent anywhere in the world. There were also, of course, more difficult things that moved along these paths. Disease moved too. The plague that devastated medieval Europe in the 14th century, the Black Death, is thought by many historians to have travelled at least partly along the trade routes of Central Asia before reaching the ports of the Black Sea and then the cities of the West. The same networks that carried silk and ideas also carried, invisibly, the catastrophes that would reshape history. And there was always danger on the road. Banditry was common. The nomadic peoples of the steppe were sometimes raiders and sometimes essential trading partners, and often both, depending on the year and the politics of the moment. Stretches of the route ran through truly inhospitable terrain where water might be days apart. The merchants who travelled these paths were brave, or desperate, or both. The great Mongol Empire of the 13th and 14th centuries changed everything for a time. Under the Mongol Khans, a vast stretch of Eurasia came under a single political umbrella, and the roads became, briefly, safer than they had ever been. This was the era of Marco Polo, who travelled from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan and spent years in China before returning home with stories so extraordinary his contemporaries found them hard to believe. Marco Polo never used the term Silk Road. That name was still 6 centuries away from being invented. He simply travelled. He observed. He was astonished over and over again by what he found. But the Mongol peace did not last. Empires rarely do. And by the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire controlled much of the overland route, and trade became complicated and expensive. European merchants, frustrated by the middlemen and the tolls and the political instability, began to ask a different question. Not how do we travel east across land, but how do we sail there? That question, asked urgently in the courts of Portugal and Spain and eventually England and the Netherlands, launched the age of discovery. Ships pushed south along the coast of Africa. Others sailed west across an ocean that European maps left blank. The world turned and turned again. And the ancient overland roads grew quieter, slowly, over the years that followed. But they never disappeared entirely. Even now, in the 21st century, the old paths are still being walked, in a sense. China's Belt and Road Initiative is a massive network of infrastructure investments, ports and railways and highways, tracing in modern concrete and steel some of the same lines that the ancient camel caravans followed across the heart of the world. The road is never truly closed, it only changes form, and the oasis towns are still there. Dunhuang still stands at the edge of the Taklamakan, and the caves at the Mogao grottos still hold their extraordinary paintings, still faintly glowing with colour after more than 1,000 years. Kashgar still sits at its great crossroads, and its old city still smells of bread and spice in the early morning. The Pamirs are still high and cold and piercingly beautiful. The sky over the Central Asian steppe at night is still full of more stars than you can count. In 2014, UNESCO declared part of the ancient route, the Chang'an to Tianshan corridor, a World Heritage Site. An acknowledgement, formal and official, that these paths belong not just to one country or one culture, but to all of us. They are part of the shared inheritance of the human race, the record of a time when people crossed the most difficult terrain on earth, not because it was easy, but because on the other side there was something worth knowing, something worth trading, something worth carrying home. Let that thought rest gently with you now. Somewhere tonight, the Taklamakan desert is still and dark. The dunes hold their shapes against the cold starlight. The oasis towns are sleeping. In Dunhuang, the caves are quiet, and the painted Buddhas sit in their ancient serenity in the way they have sat for 1,000 years through every change the world has made. In the high Pamirs, there is only wind and stone, and the immense dark sky pressing close. And somewhere along that old road, you can almost hear, if you listen quietly, the soft fall of a camel's foot on dry earth, moving forward through the dark, carrying something precious, following a path that was already ancient when it began. The caravan moves slowly. There is no hurry now. The destination will arrive when it arrives. For the moment, there is only the road, and the cool air, and the stars overhead so thick and close, they seem almost like another country you could reach if you only kept walking long enough. Close your eyes now. Let the old road carry you forward. You are moving through a world so wide and so full of beauty that there is no end to it, and no need to find one. The silk is folded carefully. The camels are patient. The oasis is just ahead. Rest now, and let the ancient world hold you quietly through the night.